Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the webinar on the IHI Call 10 on PFAS exposure, emission, and end-of-life management in the healthcare sector. My name is Nesima, and I'm going to be your moderator today. And before we start, I just want to share some information with you. If we move to the next slide. So firstly, we are recording this session, and we will be publishing the session and the slides on the IHI website after the webinar. The call will be officially launched shortly, and all the links and details of how to apply will be published on the IHI website and the Funding and Thunders portal. If you have any questions, you are welcome to send them anytime via the Q&A function on the bottom right of your screen. Just send them in to us and we will get to them at the end of the presentation. Today we have online John, who is scientific officer for this topic, and he's going to kick off with the presentation. We also have John O'Hara from UCB, who is going to present the topic itself. And we have Desmond, who is our legal officer. So now I will hand over to John.
Thank you, Nasima. So good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for attending this webinar on IHI Call 10, Topic 3. So in today's webinar, we will start with a few words on the IHI program, and then we will hear from the topic writer who will present the topic. And then we will briefly cover the proposal submission and evaluation process, as well as give some tips for interested applicants. It's important to point out that this webinar will not cover the rules and procedures. A webinar on rules and procedures for Call 10 will take place next week, and we'll put the recording on the website. So just a few words on the Innovative Health Initiative. So IHI is a partnership in health in the EU between, on the one hand, the European Commission, and on the other hand, the health industry, which is represented by 5 associations. So we have COSIR, representing the field of medical imaging, radiotherapy, and so on. We have FBA, including Vaccines Europe, representing the pharmaceutical and vaccines industries. And we have Europa Bio, representing the biotech industry. And then finally, we have MedTech Europe, representing the medical technology industry. So the general objectives of IHI are to turn health research and innovation into real benefits for patients and society, to deliver safe and effective health innovations that cover the entire spectrum of care, and to make Europe's health industries globally competitive. So IHI projects are created via open and competitive calls for proposals. They are cross-sectorial public-private partnerships that leverage contributions from the IHI industry associations and sometimes also contributions from contributing partners. They also leverage, of course, public funding via the European Commission in the form of the Horizon Europe program. So IHI's Strategic Research and Innovation Agenda, or the SRIA as we call it, details the areas that IHI should work on and helps to guide the organization's decision-making on which ideas should be turned into call topics. So the focus of the SRIA is on cross-sectorial approaches to facilitate the creation of new products and services in healthcare. The goal of the SRIA is to lay the foundations for the development of safer and more effective healthcare solutions. It's important to point out that the research supported by the IHI program remains at the pre-competitive level, as there is an expectations for industry partners to work together. And there's a link here on the slide to the SRIA for those interested. Okay, so before we go on to the topic itself, as mentioned earlier, Call 10 is a 2-stage call. So how does such a call work? So the call topic has been defined by what we refer to as the pre-identified industry consortium. In this consortium, the industry partners have aligned around a shared challenge for industry and agreed to work together to commit resources. So the pre-identified industry consortium then looks at ideas coming from the public sector and prepares the topic text. Once the topic text is approved by the IHI Governing Board, the topic is then launched as a call for proposals. So during the call for proposals, the industry consortium steps aside and we open the call to applicants applying for the public funding, only who form their own consortia. So these applicants are typically academics, hospitals, regulators, SMEs, patient organizations, and so on. These applicants will prepare what we refer to as short proposals for stage 1. So all the submitted short proposals will undergo a competitive evaluation by an independent panel of experts, and at the end, only the top-ranked proposal will go forward to stage 2. In stage 2, the consortium with the top-ranked proposal at stage 1 will merge with the original industry consortium that prepared the topic text. So this larger consortium will work together to prepare the full proposal, which will itself be evaluated at stage 2. If successful in the second evaluation, the consortium will move to the granting phase, where the grant agreement and consortium agreements are prepared, followed by the start of the project. So on that note, I will give the floor to John O'Hara, who will present the topic in detail. Over to you, John. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, John. Can we go to the next slide, please? So yes, we're going to talk about the challenges. I think, by being on this call and attending this call, you're aware that PFAS is presenting a large challenge, not just in our industry, but in other industries. But within focusing on our industry and the consortium that we've pulled together, we are facing several challenges that we have outlined here. So we really need to understand PFAS in our sector better. There have been ongoing mapping exercises, particularly in the pharmaceutical industry. However, we know that in the medtech sector, this is a little bit behind. So that's one of the goals and a challenge that we face currently. We know that we have exploited the really important and sometimes very beneficial properties of PFAS chemicals. And by doing so, they have eased and facilitated our development of equipment and consumables and packaging and delivery devices. So they are now ubiquitous within our processes and in our packaging and so on. So it's been a very useful tool, but now we have to remove it from a broad and complicated range of areas within the healthcare sector. To do this, we also need to identify suitable alternatives that have high performance characteristics that can maintain safety and quality and robustness, but also be manufactured at scale. So again, another challenge that we will have to overcome. In order to map properly, we need to have suitable methods for detection and measurement. We need to have suitable standards. And again, there's some methods available and others in development, but not broadly applicable by our industries currently. So efforts will be needed to identify a multitude of PFAS compounds in order to identify where they are and provide numerical values for the levels they are present at. We know that end-of-life management is also particularly important, and we have initiatives later on that we'll talk about in order to address this. But because PFAS are forever chemicals, they don't degrade, they will accumulate. It's clear that recently and in the last couple of years, there's been increased stringency in the regulatory area, both in Europe and the US and globally, in fact. So these rules are changing on a regular basis. We need to keep up to date with those. We need to be compliant. And that, again, is a challenge that this organization, in conjunction with some other initiatives that are ongoing, will work together to ensure we are compliant. And I've mentioned that remediation is a challenge as well. We currently have challenges to understand, detect, and remove PFAS chemicals from wastewater. So that, again, is part of the challenge that we face and an area that we would like to work in. So we can go to the next slide, please, John. So why do we need public-private and cross-sector collaboration? I think you can see by the range of different challenges we face, this will be very difficult for individual companies to do on their own. The expertise required from scientists, policymakers, regulators, healthcare providers, chemical manufacturers, and patient groups and trade associations means that we do need a very broad range of skill sets, understanding, as in order to overcome these challenges. And we really see by incorporating, using this approach through the IHI, we can avail of these skill sets more readily. We can have improved resource sharing, expertise, funding, regulatory alignment, and sustainability. And we really want to make this a global or a European initiative that really benefits the EU. So we can go to the next slide, please, John. So the scope of the topic, right, the real core here is in three different pillars. So within each pillar, we will have sub-working groups made up of various contributors, different companies, requiring a broad range of skill sets. But they divide really into these three pillars. So the first pillar is to develop PFAS alternatives, really focusing on, right, we want to replace. And in order to do that, we need to detect, we need to understand the presence of these through our manufacturing processes and healthcare delivery processes and supply chain, medical devices. And so we need to analyze, be able to analyze and detect, and then develop suitable alternatives, which is extremely challenging. Make sure that they are robust, make sure that they can be introduced readily. And we would like to pull these together and provide a searchable database of the validated PFAS alternatives. Really not an easy objective, but very worthwhile doing. The second objective is to understand the PFAS presence in the medtech sector. So that's probably a little bit behind, as I mentioned. So really running through the mapping exercise of the different parts of that medtech and diagnostic process supply chain, detecting those, identifying where they are, and again, then linking into objective 1 and working with external stakeholders to look at PFAS alternatives that would be suitable for the medtech sector. And there's an extra or an additional initiative within this pillar where we want to improve and enhance stakeholder information sharing. So we are heavily reliant on equipment manufacturers and device manufacturers, disposables, PPE, protective equipment, and manufacturers. But the information that we have available to us on the levels and percentages of PFAS and the types of PFAS within these equipment isn't always readily available. So we need to align and harmonize with those manufacturers to provide the correct information and information that is suitable for our needs. And then the third pillar is to really looking at where it may be very difficult to develop PFAS alternatives in the short term. How do we reduce and reuse and recycle materials? So really thinking about minimizing the exposure to the environment and to society by remediation and end-of-life management. So providing guidelines and also techniques and technologies to remove and decontaminate things like wastewater to prevent that ultimate exposure to society and the environment. So they're the 3 pillars. So John, if we maybe move on. So outcomes then, so what are expected outcomes? And just to kind of review what an outcome means, it's really the expected effect over a medium term. Generally will occur towards the end of this process, but it's hardly likely to occur before the end of this. So after the project is finished and maybe towards the end of it, we will see some of these outcomes. And really they fit in with that scope. So it's to replace PFAS, so generating new environmentally sustainable materials that as alternatives, then to reduce and reuse, the last part, improve the usage of PFAS materials and minimizing exposure going forward, making sure that we have a suitable map, particularly that medtech sector, and also ensuring that our pharma sector is also up to date and continues to evolve, providing that database of alternatives to PFAS. And we also expect to be able to provide new disposal processes that will be approved and available to help the environment and our citizens and society. And then if we go to the next slide, John. So the impact maybe is a longer and a wider term effect on society and the economy and our science, enabled by some of the outcomes from these studies. And we really want to directly contribute to EU health priorities, initiatives and policies, and focusing on different strategies, contribution to strategies such as the industrial strategy for Europe and the pharmaceutical strategy for Europe. So quite broad ranging strategic impacts going forward. We want to manage PFAS risks with novel mitigation measures, including safe disposal, reuse and recycling, which is the core of those 3 pillars, but also to position the EU as a leader in safe and sustainable PFAS alternatives through industry academia collaborations. And we want these to be sustainable going forward, not just for the duration of this project, but for broader term, longer term as well. Make these connections and keep them going. So we want to ensure, of course, that we have medical supply in the EU, because we can't just put a a full stop on all PFAS, and again, avoid non-EU dependencies, keep R&D activities in Europe for active substances, and address, of course, our societal and political needs. And again, we want to strengthen stakeholder collaboration to reduce the emissions and exposure until we have alternatives that are usable. And we want, because we have a consortium, we want to share industry knowledges and best practice with other stakeholders that currently exist, and this is already underway. And for our medical and biotechnology manufacturers, we want to improve that business planning to ensure that long-term we have sustainability and patient access. I think we go next slide, John. So within the consortium already, what do we have? We have pharmaceutical vaccine development, we have medical tech, we have formulators, component manufacturers, and chemical manufacturers. So we have a good range, 25 different companies are already involved with this, and we expect, you know, significant contribution for them. We already have that financial contribution, but we also need active scientific research and, you know, industry academic collaborations. So we will expect, you know, chemical synthesis and active pharmaceutical ingredient manufacturing that we can then use. We will expect to have medical device manufacturing, assembly, packaging, distribution. Regulatory affairs experience will be provided, occupational safety. We have, of course, within our companies, these capabilities. Analytical methods and in process control development, yeah, we have method development departments as well that can help. We want to also ensure that we are aligned with circular economy expertise and safe and sustainable by design methodologies. And these initiatives maybe aren't prevalent within our companies yet. So that is definitely an area that we could probably benefit from in the external world, or through the applicants. And of course, the activities and the results and the data that we have already generated within our companies, we are able to share this at a high level without getting into detail. We don't want to, as John mentioned, this is pre-competitive. So we will find ways to do this, to leverage these insights and to benefit. So really, this is an EU initiative with a collaboration and the understanding that we will work together to improve the current situation. And of course, all of this data needs to be, that we generate during this process, needs to be, you know, published and disseminated to the appropriate stakeholders, you know, beyond just the consortium. So the next slide, John. So what do we expect from the applicants? Well, there will be quite a degree of similarity and synergies between the previous slide and this slide, but it probably goes beyond what we currently have available. And as you can see from the pillars with their different sub-activities, there will be, you know, quite a few different working groups. And of course, if we only have one or two experts in one particular area, they will not be able to participate in all of the different sub-teams. So we will, you know, would rather have more experts than fewer, and within these areas that are outlined here. So academic centers, research organizations, people who really have experience in PFAS analytics, chemical synthesis, material sciences, coatings, biodegradation. So multidisciplinary and chemical understanding is absolutely essential for us. Organizations and research groups that are already working on PFAS alternatives and optimization of different materials, again, would be really essential and very helpful for us. The manufacturers of PFAS and PFAS containing materials, such as films and spare parts, equipment, foils, you name it, for, you know, blister packs, etc. All of these are more than welcome. Medical manufacturing and critical technologies, vaccines, wherever these are going to be impacted, again, really useful. And of course, we have this in drug substance manufacturing and excipients containing PFAS as well. We know that we need some standards and standard testing methodologies. So people with experience or organizations that are experienced in method development and standardizations would also be welcome. I've mentioned the analytical methodologies. Of course, one example we've given here is TFA and chromatography. So can we replace that? Process aids, tubing, gaskets, fittings, anything that where we manufacture PFAS containing aids, again, that will be an essential contribution for us. Healthcare waste and urban wastewater management, again, it falls into pillar 3, where we would like to control, remove as much as possible in any PFAS from the environment. Again, that's really helpful. And as I mentioned earlier, safe and sustainable by design and circular economy, people with practical experience of the implementation of these, initiatives will be, should really consider applying, absolutely. And then with regard to project management and dissemination, we will need support there. Again, multiple working sub-teams, a lot of coordination will be required. The output from these meetings will obviously scale up, and we need to communicate within the organization, within this consortium, but also beyond it to different groups, the IQ consortium, bioforum groups, others, regulatory agencies as well. And with that in mind, actually, people who have experience in dealing with regulatory partners and different types of meetings, type C meetings, etc., notified bodies and policymakers, where we will be able to have good communication and use data to support decision-making processes. So all of these different varied skill sets, quite broad, would be very welcome in this consortium. John, if we go to the next, thank you. And I think actually this is you, is it this you slide? John, or do you want me to take this?
I think this is your slide.
Okay, fine. So, I mean, really just a couple of numbers, really. We, as John mentioned earlier, we are across multiple organizations. So the FPA, so pharmaceutical, biopharm, vaccine, and COSIR partners. We have 25 companies already involved. UCB is leading this, designated to lead, but within the different sub-teams and the different pillars, we will have the opportunity for different companies to lead those different packages and the different the pillars as well. Currently, we have 48 million, a 50-50 mix really of contributions in kind by the partners that already exist, and then the remainder available to be disposed of to the applicants. And then the duration is 60 months. And as John mentioned, it's if approved. And as John mentioned, it's a 2-stage process.
Thank you, John.
Yeah, no worries. I think that's it from me, John.
Thank you very much. Okay, so just to point out there, very important that you shouldn't contact directly the topic writers. Okay, so now I will present some slides on the proposal submission and evaluation process. So as mentioned, applicants forming the public side of the consortium will have to prepare the short proposal for stage 1 of this 2-stage call. So for the short proposals here, the elements that need to be prepared and submitted. So the proposal template consists of a part A, a part B, and an annex. So part A is completed on the funding and tenders portal and includes all of the administrative data. Part B is the narrative part of the proposal and includes sections on excellence, impact, and implementation. The Part B template includes instructions under each section. Please, when preparing your proposals, read the instructions carefully in the template. For the short proposals, an annex will also be requested in which applicants must list all participants and indicate which type they are, for example, an SME, a hospital, a patient association, etc. So this annex template will also be available on the submission environment. So as mentioned, the proposal template includes sections on excellence, impact, and implementation. So the evaluation of proposals by the independent panel of experts will also follow these same criteria. So you can have a look at the details of the evaluation criteria yourselves on the next 2 slides. I won't go through them here today. However, it's important to highlight that in order to pass the evaluation, proposals need to have a score of a minimum of 3 out of 5 for each criterion, and an overall a minimum score of 10 from 15. And so to mention again, only the proposal with the best score at stage 1 will move on to stage 2. So it's not enough just to simply pass the evaluation. Your proposal needs to be the top ranked proposal to move on to stage 2. So just some tips for applicants. So obviously, please read all of the call relevant material, especially the topic text. So the the topic text is really the key document against which your proposal will be evaluated. Form your consortium early. And when preparing your proposal, please already start thinking about the public-private partnership aspects in your proposal, even though industry is not part of the short proposal at this stage. So for example, you should be thinking about why is IHI the right framework for the project you're proposing. It's important to demonstrate that the public-private partnership model has been considered in your proposal and how it is important for its success. So please, of course, ensure that all information requested in the call text and proposal template is provided to allow the evaluation experts to assess your proposal against the evaluation criteria. Please consider early on and plan for potential regulatory the potential regulatory impact of results that your project might generate. So you'll of course need to build your own consortium or maybe join a consortium. So please don't hesitate to, of course, use your own network of contacts, network with other participants attending this webinar. We will put up a list of all participants in today's webinar on the website. You can use the partner search tool on the funding and tenders portal. You can get in touch with your IHI national contact point, and of course you can network on social media. So now I will hand over again to Nassima.
Thank you, John. So yes, before we move to the Q&A session, and I really encourage you to drop your question on the Q&A box. This is really your only opportunity to get the information from the topic writer. As John said, you cannot contact them after this webinar. So I would like to promote the different sessions that we are holding on call 9 and 10. So next week, we still have 2 webinars for call 9 and 2 other ones for call 10. So if you haven't registered already, I will encourage you to do so on the IHI website on the event webpage. So now I think we can move to the Q&A session. So the first question is, what definition of PFAS are you working on, as they will determine the scope? And the person is adding, definitions do vary and it's likely to expand over time to cover more fluorinated chemicals. John, just you're muted.
On mute.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for the question. It is a good question, and we did spend time during last year discussing this. There is a defined chemical, or there is a defined definition for PFAS that is currently used, because we did discuss this with the European Commission. And one of our internal proposals was that we would need to come up with, possibly different categorization, if not definition, in an evolving field and evolving understanding. And yeah, so I think that will be something that will be discussed by the partners. Currently, the European Commission told us to adhere to the existing definition that you can look up. I won't relate here, but we do acknowledge that this is an important point. So at the moment, we're looking at a broad approach to what we consider PFAS chemicals. Where we think there's something of industrial relevance or medical tech sector relevance, we probably wouldn't exclude that immediately. Yes. So I can't give you a new definition, but we're aware that maybe it's a changing environment.
Thank you, John. The second question is, how can we find industry partners for call 10? Is there a brokerage event planned? I think I can start with this one. So the reply is no, there is no brokerage event plan, because this is a two-stage call. So you don't need to find industry partners as they are pre-identified industry consortium for this call. And again, applicants should not contact them during stage 1. You will need to build an applicant consortium, and there is a good page that we have on the IHI website called Find Partners, where you have all the advice and links to help you find partners. I don't know if Desmond and John want to add something to this question.
No, I think, sorry, go ahead, Desmond.
Oh no, I was just going to say, as the lawyer on the call, the non-scientist, I think the advice that we normally give to our applicants for the two-stage calls, if they want to, join or find or become part of an applicant consortium, is use your professional networks. There are some tools as referred to on the actual IHI website itself, but we found, anecdotally in the past, that it's actually reaching out to your peers, to the entities that you work with, that you actually find ways into the applicant consortium, or even look towards forming an applicant consortium yourself.
Thank you, Desmond. And also my colleague Catherine, who is moderating the Q&A function, has put the link to the page for finding partners. The next question is, can industry associations which are not part of the initial industry consortium apply, or is it only for manufacturers?
Okay, I think the answer is easy, but I think that it's complicated by the language in the question, which is a bit sticky. So let's see if I can work from basic principles, which is to take part in an IHI project, which is part of the larger Horizon Europe R&D initiative. The entity that takes part has to be an independent legal entity. And that's important because that legal entity then performs tasks in the actual project. It has work to do, it has, objectives, and in some cases then it receives remuneration of its costs for performing those tasks. So the key point is that it's really the entity that's going to be in the project, and then the entity that's basically going to perform those tasks and basically demonstrate the costs. So my concern is about the language regarding an association being able to do that. In my experience, normally in industry associations are more kind of secretariats who actually don't have a separate industrial or manufacturing capacity themselves. So it would be unusual to have such an entity as a beneficiary in an IHI project or as a participant in an IHI project, but I wouldn't rule it out, depending upon the task that they're actually going to do. What's more normal is that we would have the companies or the small and medium enterprises or the other, enterprises that are part of that association would be very, very welcome to participate in an IHI project and potentially could receive funding as part of the applicant consortium as well. But I think what I would really stress here, because the question is being asked, is if you're part of an industry association, or you are part of the industry association themselves, the first thing I would do is check to make sure as to whether you are in some way affiliated with one of the IHI private members, the core trade associations that John referred to earlier in the presentation, because then it could be possible that you would have problems, because if you're one of those private members, then really you should be in the pre-identified industry consortium that's already identified in the topic text. So what I would do is first check your affiliation. B, is it actually the association that really wants to join the project, or is it the association's members, and then proceed from there. But the short answer is anybody's welcome to participate in an IHI project as long as they can follow the rules, both in terms of performing tasks and the costs which are actually going to be incurred performing those tasks and basically doing the project.
Thank you, Desmond. And the next question is, are Swiss entities eligible for this grant?
So we've been getting this question a lot, and we're going to go into a lot more detail. I think John referred earlier on, next week we have what's called rules and procedures webinars, which is basically going to be 90 minutes of the legal aspects and the kind of the more operational aspects. So obviously it's going to be riveting. But next week we'll be talking about the Swiss entities a lot. What I would say for the purposes of this question and this webinar is, as of the 1st of January, Switzerland has indicated its willingness to join the Horizon Europe program, but the agreement isn't signed yet. So we're going to utilize what is called a transitional arrangement, which we've done before in relation to the UK, which is if you are a Swiss entity, the Swiss entity can apply to IHI projects, and we will treat them as a future beneficiary who is eligible to receive funding for the purposes of the proposal and the evaluation. But if indeed your applicant consortium is approved for funding, it wins the first competitive round and then goes and joins with the industry consortium and is part of the final consortium, and that's approved for funding. if we get to the grant agreement stage and Switzerland still hasn't completed the paperwork, hasn't signed the association agreement between the EU and Switzerland, then unfortunately, then IHI will not be able to fund you, not because IHI doesn't want to, but because the overall legal agreement between the bloc and Switzerland hasn't been signed and completed. The good news, though, the consolation is that we understand and have seen this in IHI calls 1 to 8. Switzerland has extremely robust funding mechanisms for its own legal entities that are in projects and not receiving funding from IHI. So if you're a Swiss entity and you're thinking of getting involved in an IHI project at this stage, and we'll repeat this in the rules and procedure webinar next week, I would say proceed on the basis that you're eligible to receive funding, but you would be remiss if you did not contact the Swiss government and say, look, I'm applying for this actual project in IHI. It's transitional because the overall association agreement is signed. Will I receive funding if it turns out that when we get to grant agreement signature, the agreement isn't signed? Can I get funding from the Swiss government instead? And I would be 95% confident that the reply would be in the affirmative. There's always some exceptions, but that's ideally what the Swiss entity should do to make sure that they have a backup scenario in place if there's a delay in the kind of the larger international agreement being signed.
Thank you, Desmond. And we move on to the next question. How can an industrial company with a turnover larger than 500 million and not part of the pre-identified industry consortium join this initiative?
Well, I mean, as I said, the previous question, you're welcome to join. That's not a problem. So the IHI rule is, and to go back to my original point about a legal entity, if you are a discrete legal entity, as in a very, very large company, that's absolutely fine. You're very welcome to join the actual project. You mean if you join in the consortium, I mean. The issue, though, is because of your size, if you are more than 500 million annual turnover, then you will not receive funding from IHI. That's the separate issue. I think John said in one of the very early slides, there's a difference between eligibility to participate, which is basically to get involved, and eligibility to receive funding. So the logic is that in a two-stage call, the in-kind and financial contributions are basically coming from industry, and then it's the applicant consortia, the one that we're talking about, who are submitting the short proposal, who basically go for funding, but then there are limitations on that in relation to size. So if you're confident that you are from one of these very, very large companies, for the purposes of this two-stage call, then I have to confirm that you're welcome to come, but IHI can't actually fund you.
Thank you, Desmond. We have a question. Who is part of the pre-identified industry consortium? So here I can see that my colleague Catherine has already put the link of the call text, which is final, in the chat. So you have the details on who are the pre-identified industry consortium. I don't see any new question in the chat, in the Q&A box. I just want to encourage you also to follow us on social media, so you have our latest news. And again, just a reminder, the slide and the recording will be published after the webinar, so you will have access to all the material. I don't see any other questions. As I said, this is your your only chance to ask the question to the topic writer. So otherwise, we'll close the webinar, and I assume the presentation were really clear, both the Johns that you gave. So let's give a few minutes, but no, I don't see any new question in the chat. Okay, so I assume we can close the webinar. So I want to thank you, both Johns and Desmond, for your presentation and answering the questions. Thank you to all of you for your interest, and I wish you a good luck with your proposal. And I wish you a very nice day. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.